Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the 9 p.m. English News Edition. Here are the headlines. Launch of the first edition of Science Week in Djibouti. The Indian movement rejects President Moreno's offer of dialogue. Hello and welcome again. Following the death of the late Saad Margele, several messages of condolence from officials and individuals still reach the RTD. Thus, the President of Yemen, Mr. Abdurrabbo Mansour, sent a message of condolence to the President of the Republic and the family of the late Saad Margele. In addition, the President of the Cat Importers Union, Mr. Hussein Ahmed Farah, Sheikh Abdullahi bin Sheikh Ali Johar, Sheikh of the city of Borma, Idris Ambassa, Secretary General of the Tajwa Regional Council, sends his condolence to the President of the Republic, and Sheikh Awolu Mohammed of Obok express their sincere condolence to the President of the Republic and the family of the late Saad Margele. The Director of Honors, Mr. Hussein Hassan Darar, the General Manager of National Oil of Djibouti, Mr. Tadisi Tilahun, and the staff of Djibouti Nok Company also addressed their condolence. And finally, the President of the Commune of Balbala, Adan Mohammed Hamad, Inna Lillah wa Inna Ilahi Raj'un. And for national news, the work of the validation workshop of the Emergency Organization Plan called RSEC plan began today at the People's Palace. The Minister of the Interior, Mr. Mumin Ahmed Sheikh, officially opened the meeting in the presence of the Regional Coordinator of the United Nations System, representative of UN agencies, Secretary General and Directors, Mr. Ahmed Mohammed Madar, Executive Secretary of Risk and Disaster Management, welcomed the guest and participant and recalled the different stage of the process of updating the emergency management plan. Subsequently, Mrs. Barbara Menzi, Resident Coordinator of the United Nations System in Djibouti, recalled the importance of the validation of the RSEC plan, but also the relevance of effectiveness of the work between the government and the UN agencies. Finally, the Resident Coordinator read the message from the UN Secretary General on the occasion of the celebration of the Disaster Prevention Day. I quote, "During my life and career, I have been to many different places, communities affected by extreme weather events and other natural disasters, from the South Pacific to the Caribbean via Mozambique and elsewhere. Again, I was able to see the effects of the climate emergency on the vulnerable populations whose lives are devastated and disrupted. Disaster causes terrible suffering and can destroy by 4 decades of development efforts. Over the next 10 years, thousands of billions of dollars will be spent and invested around the world in new housing, schools, hospitals, and other infrastructures. These investments must focus on climate change resilience and disaster risk reduction. The economic argument in favor of these measures is strong. To improvement of infrastructures, resilience to climate change is related to benefits cost of about 6 to 1. That is, every dollar invested saves 6. For example, invested in climate change resilience promote job creation and savings. This is the right approach. It can help to mitigate and prevent human suffering." And now, with the Minister of Interior, Mr. Mumin Ahmed Sheikh, stressed the importance of adopting the RSEC plan, which will enable national actors to deal with exceptional situations and avoid risky management in the event of a disaster characterized by improvised response and poor coordination of operation. The Minister of the Interior added that this plan will make it possible to define a general procedure for disaster risk management and victim care with a view to limiting damage. The Minister of the Interior took the opportunity to congratulate the experts of the OCHA office and the UNDP for the support, the members of the Intersectoral Technical Committee for Disaster Management for their contribution, and the Executive Secretary for Disaster Management and his team for the successful organization of this event. And now the Minister of National Education and Vocational Training, Mr. Mustafa Mohammed Mahmoud, today handed over a set of 3,000 literacy textbooks to UNFD Vice President Hassan Ahmed Belil. The award ceremony took place at Kripen in the presence of senior managers from MENFOP and UNFD. The Director General of Kripen, Mr. Saeed Noor Hassan, welcomed the participant and commended the effort of the editorial commissions of these manuals, which had done a remarkable job. The Minister expressed his satisfaction with this collaboration with UNFD, which is part of the implementation of Sustainable Development Objectives, particularly ODD 4, and which will have to be intensified in order to achieve quality in the field of literacy. Mr. Mustafa Mohammed Mahmoud concluded by recalling that women's education is the basis of a family's education and therefore a fundamental contribution to our nation's development. The Vice President of the UNFD, Mrs. Hassan Ahmed Belil, for her part, wanted to express the UNFD's deep gratitude for the implementation of these literacy projects because the publication of this manual is part of the strategy to eradicate illiteracy. She thanked MENFOP, which is an essential partner in the fight against illiteracy. She concluded by stressing that these 3,000 manuals will be distributed to literacy centers and will serve as pedagogical tools of choice. And for his part, the Minister of National Education and Vocational Training, Mr. Mustafa Mohammed Mahmoud, recalled that these manuals, designed under the supervision of the UNFD Program Coordinator and published by Kripen, will effectively and efficiently implemented the objective to be achieved in terms of literacy. He pointed out that these manuals are distinguished by their linguistic and cultural diversity, a source of pleasure for the Minister, who praised the remarkable work done by the UNFD. And now the science. The first edition of the African Science Week, following the example of African country, was launched this morning at the People's Palace. This first event of its kind in Djibouti was organized by the Center of Technology and Innovation for Development, known as CTAID, with the ambassador of the Forum of the Next Einstein, known as NEF, Mrs. Jaltu Abubakar. This event brought together several members of the government, including the Minister of Energy, Mr. Yunis Ali Gedi, the Minister of Social Affairs, Mrs. Muna Usman Aden, the Secretary General of our Presidency, Mohammed Abdullahi Wa'ez, researchers, local academic actors, public and private, partners, and above all, students need in science, technology, and others. This Science Week aims to introduce the world of science, research, and technology through Science Days, the organization of panel discussion, codification workshops, to celebration of women in STEM events, in short, fun and relevant activities for all age group. This first edition of African Science Week aims to offer students and citizens the opportunity to become more involved in science, and special attention will be given to women and girls during the week. In his speech, Samatar Abdu Usman said that science contributes to human development on a global scale. And as for her, the doctor and the NEF ambassador, Mrs. Jaltu Abubakar, remind us that the challenge was to give us the means to maintain the path of progress in order to remain in touch with the knowledge economy. If Africa is lagging behind, she said, on the Industrial Revolution, it must firmly anchor itself to the digital revolution. It has the capacity to do so, and our young people have the talent and intelligence to do so. And Mr. Mohammed Abdullahi congratulated the organizer. You are the actor, he stressed, of the country that transforms the present to shape the future. You must take the lead in order to make us part of history. And finally, the Minister of Energy and the Minister of Social Affairs congratulated the young people, but also the organizer, in order to reflect this desire to bring Djibouti into the evolution of African countries in step with technological innovation. Through the NEF, we must mobilize all the levels, they said, for the emergence of the talents of our youths. These young people are the flowers to bear the fruits of tomorrow. And the Minister of Energy, in charge of natural resources, His Excellency Mr. Yunis Ali Gedi, received in his cabinet the new French ambassador, His Excellency Mr. Arnaud Guillois, who took up his duty as French ambassador to the Republic of Djibouti on August 17. This courtesy visit by the ambassador, which is part of the traditional first contact, enabled the two leaders to discuss the state of relations between the two peoples in the two countries, which were unanimously considered good, important and satisfactory, but also the ways and means of strengthening them. Indeed, the Minister of Energy in charge of natural resources, His Excellency Mr. Yunus Ali Gedi, immediately underlined his enthusiasm to receive for the first time the ambassador of a major country, France, with whom Djibouti has solid and special relations, while Ambassador Arnaud Gillois said he was very pleased to be welcomed, but with significant protocol flexibility in a minister with high potential in an essential actor for Djibouti's development. After an overview that allowed the two senior officials to discuss the different sectors in which French cooperation and assistance are focused, Minister Yunus assured the ambassador he will find within the Minister of Energy in charge of natural resources of an attentive availability as well as an effective facilitation to ensure the success of projects developed jointly with French companies. The French ambassador was accompanied by his charge d'affaires, while Mrs. Omar Ahmed Moussa and Mr. Goulet Mohammed, respectively Senior Advisor and Director of Energy, attended the meeting. And now in the Labor, Ministry of Labor in charge of the reform and administration, Isman Ibrahim Roble received an audience the French ambassador to Djibouti, His Excellency Mr. Arnaud Gillois, accompanied by the embassy's Cooperation and Cultural Action Advisor, Mrs. Stephanie Gallet. The meeting was attended by the Secretary General, Mr. Abdullah Ali Mohammed, and Mr. Qadir Omar Khanille, the Minister's Communication Advisor. During this meeting, the Minister and the French diplomat recalled in turn the depth of friendship between the two countries. The Minister of Labor gave an overview of France's areas of cooperation, particularly the strengthening of INAP's capacity in the field of training of public officials. For his part, the ambassador said he was open and available to take all necessary steps to improve cooperation in the areas of interest to the Minister of Labor. At the end of the meeting, the two sides agreed the work to strengthen the bonds of friendship and cooperation between the two countries. And as part of the Astra household spraying campaign in the neighborhood, the Department of Health has intensified awareness raising and social mobilization activities within the community. It should be noted that all these promotional activities were carried out in close collaboration with the UNFD, which supported the department throughout the spraying campaign. In District 4, in Arhiba, as in District 6, the Ministry organized advocacy evening that generated strong mobilization from civil society, active members of community-based association, and community relays from the health community of this high-risk malaria district. To this end, it is necessary to raise awareness and inform the residents of the neighborhoods concerned about the importance of their involvement at all stages of the implementation of this vector control campaign. Animated by awareness-raising sketches, these events also allowed the various sectoral leaders who followed one another at the microphone to provide useful clarification and explanation on the benefits and advantage of this new inter-housing spraying technique. Each of these communicating with the community have been very successful and have been instrumental in engaging the recipient population in supporting their adherence to the vector control program, which is essential given the high endemicity of malaria in our country. And now we regret to inform you of the death of the late Roble Aden Roble yesterday at La Casale. The late Roble Aden, born in 1984, leaves behind a large number of children, including his parents and 11 siblings. He is a family member of our colleague in the Assembly Department of Montage, Mukhtar Jama. We share the pain of the family and the good Lord to welcome him to his eternal paradise. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And now moving on the international news. London and Brussels embarked on intense negotiation on Friday to try to break the Brexit deadlock. With 20 days to go before the divorce, the resumption of talks in extremism means that European and British negotiator Michel Barnier and Steve Barclay believe that there is still a chance of finding a solution Michel Barnier, European negotiator for Brexit, we had a constructive meeting with Steve Barclay and the British team. I will now report back to Parliament's 27 ambassadors and Brexit steering group. As I said before, Brexit is like climbing a mountain. We need determination, vigilance and patience. The wind of optimism rose on Thursday after a meeting between the British and Irish Prime Ministers, who said they had seen a possible compromise. So far, the European Union has refused the Boris Johnson proposals, but Brussels wants to avoid a Brexit without an agreement. Donald Tusk, President of the European Council, of course, there is a guarantee of success and time is almost up, but even the slightest chance must be used. A Brexit without an agreement will never be the European Union's choice. The issue of customs controls on the Irish border seemed unsolved until now. The compromise and the discussion could finally provide a solution. The discussion will be reviewed on Monday, on the eve of a meeting of European foreign ministers. And now artisanal stones and rockets thrown by the demonstrators on one side, replicas with tear gas and rubber bullets by the other police. In Quito, Ecuador, tensions between the indigenous movement and President Lenin Moreno are not subsiding. The country is experiencing renewed tension in a crisis caused by the announcement of a rise in gasoline prices of more than 100% in exchange for an IMF loan of more than $4 billion, a price increase that hits the indigenous population, who represent the majority of the poorest population and a quarter of the total population, hard. President Lenin Moreno had called in a television address for direct dialogue in order to find solutions, an offer rejected by the Confederation of Indigenous Nationality of Ecuador, the main indigenous organization. 10 days clash between demonstrators and police forces left at least 5 people dead, including an indigenous leader, and more than 2,000 injured, according to the Office of the Ombudsman, a public human rights body. And this is it for this news. Thank you for watching us and have a wonderful night.